sleeping on straw sacks, and lice-infested bedding. Hey guys. Tonight, we slip back into a time when mornings didn't begin with alarms or hot showers, but with the creak of wood, the rustle of straw, and the undeniable aroma of damp wool. You're waking up in your tiny cottage, the sun just peeking through the cracks in the shutters. Your bed, if we can be generous, is a lumpy mattress stuffed with straw, stitched into an old linen sack that hasn't seen a wash in months. The straw crunches beneath you as you shift, poking your back in just the wrong places. The scent is a pungent blend of sweat, mildew, and something that might once have been cheese. You sit up, blinking against the dim gray of the room. Dust floats in the air, caught in the shaft of morning light that slices through the wooden slats. You scratch your arm, then your side. Then your leg. It's not just the rough blanket. No, you've got company. Lice, fleas, maybe even a few bedbugs are part of the nightly package deal. People in this era don't know about bacteria, but they do know that everyone's always itchy. In fact, there's a tiny comb tucked into your belt for just such occasions, an anti-lice tool that gets passed around the whole family, like a toothbrush at a sleepover. Charming. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I also love seeing where everyone's watching from, so drop your country and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You might be sleeping in the same bed as your siblings, or your cousins, or your livestock. Privacy, not a medieval priority. The mattress itself probably hosts a whole ecosystem of vermin, which is why you sleep in your clothes. It's one extra layer between you and the crawlers. Historians still debate whether people even slept fully lying down. Many likely propped themselves up slightly to avoid the congestion they believed could cause illness. Cozy, right? The chill of dawn in stone cottages. You breathe in sharply as your feet touch the floor. Cold, rough, packed dirt. No insulation, no rug. The air inside the cottage is colder than you'd hoped, with last night's fire long since died to a pile of ash and charcoal. Your breath fogs in the gloom, drifting upward toward the wooden rafters like a ghost of warmth that once was. You wrap your thin wool tunic tighter around your chest, but the draft coming in from the cracks in the wall doesn't care. It whistles past your ankles like a rude medieval greeting. Your home is stone if you're lucky, wattle and daub if you're not. Either way, insulation isn't part of the architectural vocabulary yet. Windows are small, unglazed, and covered in oiled cloth or wooden shutters. Great for privacy, terrible for heat retention. You might be tempted to go outside just to stand in the sun. Except it's January, and it's raining, and your only shoes are leather scraps with twine. The central hearth is supposed to keep the house warm, but that's a bit of optimistic folklore. Fires burn wood, and firewood is not cheap if you can't gather your own. If you do have it, the smoke curls thick through the one-room house before escaping through the hole in the roof, giving everything a slightly smoked flavor, including you. It also means your eyes sting, and you cough before you can even say good morning to anyone else stirring on the floor beside you. Sometimes people even slept close to animals to share body heat, cows, pigs, goats, whoever was welcome and wouldn't eat the bedding. It wasn't uncommon for a family to sleep in shifts, with older kids taking the warm side of the bed when parents got up early. And still your nose is numb. The only warm spot is under your armpit, which you cling to like it's your own personal fireplace. Historians still argue whether the so-called Little Ice Age made winters harsher than we imagine, or if chronic cold was simply a fact of life. Either way, the idea of snoozing under a down comforter is a distant dream, something you might hear about in a minstrel's song, or confuse with heaven itself. Why layers don't help. and sometimes hurt. You might think the solution is simple. Just add more layers. But in medieval times, dressing for warmth is less about comfort and more about survival, with a dash of social rules, bad tailoring, and scratchy regret. You pull on another woolen shift, hoping for relief, but all it really does is trap yesterday's smell while making it harder to move your elbows. The fibers itch like 1,000 tiny ants under your skin. Wool is warm, sure, but it's also unforgiving. If it gets wet, like from your sweat or from that ever-leaking roof, it turns into a soggy, cold sponge wrapped around your torso. You try not to shiver as you lace up your overtunic. Laces are made of leather or hemp and fray easily. Buttons, rare and expensive. Zippers. Don't even dream of it. Getting dressed in the morning is like solving a puzzle using twine, pins, and gritted teeth. If you're lucky enough to have a cloak, it's held in place with a brooch heavy enough to knock out a rat. Sometimes you wear 2 cloaks, one over the other like a wool sandwich, hoping at least one keeps the wind from sneaking through. And let's not forget that layers can also be a liability. Move too quickly or try to work, and suddenly you're drenched in sweat beneath them. Cold sweat in a drafty house? Welcome to pneumonia's warm-up act, and there's no such thing as climate control. If you're too warm indoors, tough luck. You could take off a layer, sure, but then everyone will see your undertunic, which is basically the medieval equivalent of showing up to school in your pajamas. Modesty was the rule, even if you were sweating through your socks. Speaking of socks, if you have them, they're probably wool too, with the texture of dried seaweed and the scent of last season's mud. Pulling them up is a struggle. They never quite reach the same height, and one always slouches sadly around your ankle by mid-morning. Historians still debate how much layering was practical versus performative. Did people wear 3 tunics because they needed to, or because it looked like they had 3 tunics to wear? Status always mattered, even when your nose was freezing. Morning itches, bites, and the medieval skincare struggle. You stretch your arms with a groan, but the relief is short-lived. Your wrist itches, then your thigh, then a spot on your back you can't reach without dislocating a shoulder. Welcome to the medieval morning ritual, the full-body scratch. You absent-mindedly reach for the little wooden lice comb tucked into your belt, a cherished heirloom passed down like fine china, except it's used to scrape bugs out of your scalp. Charming. Your skin feels raw, not just from the incessant scratching, but from the layers of grime and ash that seem to have permanently bonded with your pores. Bathing is rare, not because people didn't value cleanliness, but because it's both time-consuming and risky. The communal bathhouse down the road is rumored to be crawling with disease. And let's be honest, you don't exactly want to sit naked next to the blacksmith's apprentice again, not after the garlic soup incident. Instead, you wash your face with cold water from a wooden bowl, if there's any left from yesterday's rain. There's no soap, just lye or sand or maybe some mushy herbs if someone in your family has a green thumb and a sense of optimism. Your hands are rough from scrubbing things like turnips, wool, and your own dignity. And if you happen to have a blemish, forget concealer. The only treatment available is to cover it with a bit of flour, or if you're particularly fashion-forward, a medieval beauty patch made of mouse skin. That's not a joke. That actually happened. Meanwhile, the fleas seem immune to winter. They burrow into your bedding, your clothes, your hair. There are nights when you swear you hear them laughing. You crush one between your fingers, and then spend 5 minutes wondering if it had friends. You will lose this war. Everyone does. Historians still argue whether medieval people were truly filthy by modern standards, or if they simply adapted to their environment. But one thing's certain, when your entire skincare routine consists of avoiding open wounds and hoping the lice take weekends off, glowing means something entirely different. Chamber pots under beds, and where it all goes. You shuffle across the floor, still itchy, your breath fogging in the frigid air as you head to complete the second most important ritual of your medieval morning, relieving yourself. But don't expect privacy, or plumbing. Or dignity, really, tucked beneath your bed, or possibly sitting right out in the open, depending on your family's space and shame level, is a chamber pot. It's a squat ceramic bowl with a lip and no lid. You pick it up carefully, trying not to slosh. Yes, it's full. Yes, it's cold. Yes, it smells like everything you wish to forget. In a household of 6 to 10 people crammed into one room, chamber pots aren't a convenience. They're a necessity, and they're used all night long. If you wake up at 2 a.m. needing to pee, you do your best not to step in it, or knock it over, or accidentally use the soup pot instead. There are stories, whispered with horror, about travelers who confuse the two. You don't want to be part of that legacy. Once full, and they always get full, someone has to empty it. That someone is usually you if you're the youngest or the least persuasive. You step outside if weather and curfews allow and chuck the contents into the street. No sewer grates, no running water, just you, gravity, and a prayer that no one is passing by below your window. If you're polite or want to avoid being fined, you shout, "Gardilou," before throwing it. That's the medieval version of "look out below" in charmingly butchered French. Sometimes you don't even make it outside. Many homes have a designated waste pit nearby or share one with neighbors. The smell is unforgettable. And unfortunately, it often mixes with cooking smoke, animals, and unwashed humans. You breathe through your mouth and pretend you're somewhere else. Anywhere else. Maybe a forest glade. Maybe a time with toilets. Historians still debate how often chamber pots were cleaned properly or disinfected at all. The consensus seems to be not often. Hygiene was less about eradicating germs, because no one knew they existed, and more about coping with the daily mess in the least offensive way possible. And your morning just began. Public latrines and the gossip they hosted. Let's say you don't have a chamber pot, or maybe your household has rules about solid matters and prefers those be done elsewhere. That means you're headed to the public latrine. Now, don't picture a neat row of porta-potties or the tiled stalls of a truck stop. A medieval public latrine is often a stone bench with several large holes cut into it, usually suspended over a pit or river. Privacy is a luxury for nobles. For you, it's a group activity like weaving or catching rats. You make your way through the town's winding streets, carefully avoiding puddles that might not be water. The latrine is usually near the market square or by a stream, the logic being that water can carry things away, though that logic doesn't account for people downstream who end up drinking what you flushed. You arrive to find several folks already seated, chatting about everything from crop yields to local scandals. Gossip and bowel movements, two things that bonded medieval neighbors across class lines. You take your place, avoiding the still warm stone seat someone just vacated. No dividers, no doors, and definitely no toilet paper. Just a shared sponge on a stick, if you're lucky. And yes, it's reused. Or maybe you have to bring your own bundle of moss or a scrap of cloth. The stench is ever present, and you quickly learn to breathe shallowly and smile politely, as if this were a normal tea party and not a communal defecation event. As you sit there, listening to a fishmonger discuss the baker's poor choice in flour, you realize something. Everyone knows everyone's business. Not just what you said, but when you came, how long you stayed, and what condition you were in when you left. A particularly lengthy visit might spark rumors about your health. A short one? Suspicion that you're hiding something. The public latrine is less a place of relief and more of an accidental confessional booth. Historians still argue about how much people relied on these facilities versus using more private options. But in towns and cities, the communal latrine was often where hygiene, rumor, and social status collided in one particularly pungent little room. What passed for toilet paper? Ouch. So now comes the part you've been dreading, but you can't avoid it. You've done your business, and now you're left with the awkward question. How do you clean yourself up in a world without charmin, plumbing, or even reliable soap? Well, brace yourself. The options are rustic. The most common toilet paper across Europe, moss. Not the soft, velvety kind you might find cushioning a woodland glade, but whatever moss could be gathered, dried, and reused. It's absorbent, sure, but it also crumbles, snags, and doesn't exactly offer spa-level comfort. You reach for the communal pile and whisper a prayer that no one used it before you without telling. If you're in a wealthier household, or at least one that's moderately organized, you might find cloth rags designated for the purpose. But washing those is someone's full-time job, and they don't get bleached so much as soaked and wrung out and hung near the cooking fire to air dry. Delicious. In some parts of the continent, especially in monastic communities or noble estates, you might be offered a wooden spatula or ceramic scraper, essentially a flat stick. It's about as fun as it sounds. Romans had sponges on sticks, and some of that knowledge trickled down, but in medieval times, it was usually just wood, straw, or rags. If you're out in the countryside, you might reach for a handful of hay, leaves, watch out for poison ones, or, on desperate days, a smooth stone. Now, if you're really lucky, you've stumbled upon a gong farmer, one of the most unfortunate job titles in history. These brave souls would scoop out cesspits and cart off the waste to be dumped outside the city. They were paid well but ostracized socially because, they smelled like work, and if none of that works for you, well, some people simply didn't wipe. That's not conjecture. It's a documented fact. Whether from poverty, lack of access, or just accepting the reality of medieval life, cleanliness was often aspirational at best. Historians still debate whether some regions prioritized hygiene more than others, but most agree that the variety of post-bathroom solutions was both creative and deeply uncomfortable. You, unfortunately, get to test them firsthand. Smell, shame, and medieval sanitation myths. As you rise from your place and carefully tie your garments back together, you're hit, again, by a familiar, pungent cloud. It clings to everything, your tunic, your hair, your very soul. In medieval towns, the smell wasn't just unpleasant. It was part of the background, woven into the very fabric of daily life. The streets reek of human waste, horse manure, rotting vegetables, and sometimes worse. If it rains, the muck thickens. If it doesn't, the stench bakes under the sun like a forgotten onion stew. Either way, your nose is under constant assault. You try not to gag, and more importantly, you try not to stand out. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. If you seem too clean, people might find it suspicious. Bathing too often was thought to weaken the body's defenses. Some even believed that opening the pores with warm water made you vulnerable to bad air or miasma, which was widely blamed for spreading disease. So you embrace the funk, not because you like it, but because you fear the alternative. Sanitation wasn't entirely ignored, though. There were town officials responsible for street cleaning and waste disposal, known in some areas as scavengers or rakers, but these efforts were minimal, inconsistent, and often defeated by the sheer volume of daily filth. Gutters ran along the center of the road, where everything from dishwater to pig guts ended up. Shoes were less fashion statements and more armor. You lift your hem carefully with every step, and if you dared to question this fragrant status quo, say, by dumping your chamber pot without warning, you might face public shame, Fines, stocks, and even social exile awaited anyone who let their waste splash someone else. That's right. Even in an era overflowing with literal excrement, people still found time for etiquette. Historians still argue over how aware medieval people were of sanitation's impact on health. Some claim they were ignorant of germs, but observant enough to recognize the link between filth and sickness. Others think that the cultural norms simply prioritized convenience over cleanliness. Either way, your morning bathroom break has turned into a philosophical crisis, and your boots still squelch when you walk. What breakfast looked like? Hint, stale bread. By the time you're done emptying chamber pots and dodging street muck, your stomach begins its slow, hopeful rumble. It's morning in medieval Europe, and that means it's time for bread. Just bread. Often stale, sometimes slightly moldy. Occasionally dipped in warm beer if you're feeling fancy. The idea of a hot breakfast is foreign to most commoners, and the closest thing to variety is whether your crust is yesterday's or the day before. You tear off a piece of the coarse loaf sitting in a woven basket by the hearth. It's dense, heavy, and dusted with a bit of ash from the night's fire, an accidental seasoning that no one really minds anymore. The bread is made from rye or barley, mixed with just enough flour to hold it together. White bread exists, sure, but it's reserved for monks and nobles. You, friend, are chewing on what feels like compressed hay. Butter, when it's around, is a treat. Most mornings you're lucky to get a smear of bean paste or a sprinkling of salt if someone hasn't sold it off for a better favor. Fruit is rare outside of summer, and even then it's usually dried, shriveled, or halfway fermented. Eggs? Kept for trade. Cheese? Only if the cow cooperated. Most mornings, what you have is what didn't spoil overnight, and cereal. Sure, in the medieval sense, porridge. Made from oats or millet, it simmers slowly over the hearth, absorbing every smoky particle in the air. It tastes faintly of burnt spoon and desperation, but it's filling. And in a world where calories equal survival, that's what matters. Still, you dream of coffee, that dark, steaming mug of hope. But coffee won't arrive in Europe for centuries, and even when it does, it won't be for folks like you. Instead, you sip ale, a weak, yeasty concoction brewed in the village, safer than water and stronger than sorrow. Everyone drinks it, even children. It's low in alcohol, but high in questionable flavors. Historians still debate how nutritious the peasant breakfast really was. Some claim it was balanced in its simplicity. Others argue it barely sustained people through their brutal routines. Either way, you're chewing your second bite, wondering if it's worth the cracked molar. Spoiler, it probably isn't. Ale instead of water? Yes, even for kids. You glance around for a drink to wash down the mouthful of yesterday's rye, and there it is, your trusty mug of small beer. It's warm, vaguely sour, and has a frothy head that's more foam than finesse. Still, it's what you've got. You take a sip, wincing slightly. It tastes like barley tea that someone whispered alcohol into from another room. Water, believe it or not, is not the beverage of choice in medieval Europe. In fact, it's viewed with deep suspicion, especially in towns. Wells are often shallow and close to latrines, cesspits, or livestock enclosures. Streams and rivers double as waste disposal systems. And unless you're in a remote village with a pristine spring, the water likely carries things you'd rather not ingest. Parasites, bacteria, questionable colors. It's nature's roulette, so instead you drink ale. Small beer, to be specific, which is brewed to be low in alcohol and just strong enough to kill off waterborne nasties. It's consumed by everyone. Laborers, monks, children. Yes, even toddlers get a sip. It's not enough to get drunk on unless you drink gallons, but it does dull the sharper corners of the morning. And in some cases, you're already brewing the next batch on the hearth with a mix of grains, herbs, and boiled water. Of course, brewing is a skill, and not everyone has it. Sometimes the batch turns out too weak and spoils. Other times, it's too strong and starts arguments before breakfast. And if you can't afford ale, you're stuck with watered-down wine, goat's milk, which doesn't keep long, or something called posset, a curdled, spiced milk drink that tastes like regret. Hydration, as you're learning, is a gamble. You take another sip, trying to ignore the bits floating near the rim. Your friend claims they're just yeast. You hope he's right. Otherwise, it's mystery stew in a mug. Historians still argue about the daily alcohol intake of medieval people. Some believe small beer was so weak it barely registered. Others think people were in a constant state of mild buzz, just to cope. Either way, your morning beverage won't refresh you, but it might keep you alive. Cheers. Rare luxuries: honey, jam, and breakfast meats. On the rarest of mornings, say a feast day or after a particularly successful trade, you might be lucky enough to enjoy a breakfast with a touch of decadence. Today is not one of those days, but let's imagine it is. Your neighbor comes by with a small crock of honey. Actual honey, sticky, golden, and thick like molten sunshine. It's a luxury, hoarded by monasteries and taxed by kings, and it takes dozens of bees and hours of labor just to fill a spoonful. You smear the tiniest amount across your bread, and for a moment the day feels bearable. If you're even luckier, someone in your household managed to preserve berries over the summer. Not quite jam as you know it, but mashed fruit mixed with honey or dried into paste. You chew slowly, savoring the tang of something that didn't grow from a root. Even in the dead of winter, this taste of summer is worth celebrating. Of course, you'll have to work it off in the fields, but for now, it's glorious. Occasionally, breakfast might include protein. Meat is a generous term. It might be salted pork, dried fish, or a sliver of smoked sausage. These aren't standard fare. They're leftovers from the previous day's dinner, or saved for special days like saints' feasts or weddings. A strip of bacon is cause for gossip. "They must have sold another goat," someone mutters as you nibble it in the corner, pretending not to hear. These treats are often shared, and they bring people together. A communal pot of pottage, enriched with a bit of meat or fat, becomes the centerpiece. No one has their own plate. You dip your bread in, same as everyone else, and hope someone doesn't double dip. Fingers, not forks, are the norm. Historians still debate how often the medieval poor had access to animal products. Some argue preserved meats and fats were more common than we assume. Others believe these appearances in records reflect feast days, not daily habits. Either way, you wipe your mouth with your sleeve, grateful for something that didn't crunch like bark. It's going to be a long day. Fasting days and food rules enforced by faith. Just when you start thinking breakfast isn't too bad, boom, it's Wednesday, or maybe Friday. Or the eve of a saint's feast. You've lost count again. Either way, you're fasting. That doesn't mean no food entirely. It means no meat, no dairy, and nothing that tastes remotely like fun. Welcome to the deeply religious dietary calendar of medieval Europe, where food is tightly bound to faith and failure might land you in spiritual hot water. The church prescribes dozens of fasting days throughout the year, some official, others regional. Lent, 40 days of culinary sorrow. Advent, more of the same. And then there are ember days, rogation days, and feast eves. For a poor laborer, this adds up to over half the year eating like a penitential rabbit. Today, you're permitted a thin broth, some bread, and maybe a boiled turnip. If you've got fish, congratulations, you've cracked the fasting loophole. Fish isn't considered meat, so eels, pike, and dried herring become staples of the religiously obedient. Richer folks get clever. Beaver tails and puffins, due to their semi-aquatic nature, were sometimes classed as fish. No, really. You sip your thin ale and chew your sad root vegetable, trying not to think about the bacon you saw 2 days ago. The priest warns that gluttony is a sin, but hunger never feels particularly sinful when your stomach growls like a demon. Still, everyone around you is obeying the rules, more or less. And breaking the fast publicly, that gets noticed. Fasting isn't just a spiritual practice, it's a community one. It shapes markets, diets, and even breeding cycles for animals. Fishmongers thrive, butchers sulk. You plan your meals around church bells and calendars drawn in wax or scratched into wooden boards. Historians still argue whether medieval fasting was more about control or devotion. Probably both. But for you, it means yet another morning of pretending boiled barley tastes like divine reward. Spoiler, it doesn't. Linen, wool, and why everything itched. You've finished your meager breakfast, and the chill still clings to your skin. It's time to dress for the day. You start with a shirt, if you're lucky enough to own one, made of coarse linen. Not the fine, breathable linen of your daydreams, but the scratchy, stiff, often unwashed kind that smells faintly of last week's turnips. Linen is the inner layer, worn closest to your skin, and it's supposed to wick away sweat and grime. In reality, it just traps them. Over that goes a tunic, almost certainly wool. Everything is wool. Thick, heavy, itchier than regret. You're allergic? Too bad. You pull it over your head like a sack, the coarse fibers dragging across your arms, and try not to wince. If it's winter, or just chilly, which is most of the year, you add another wool tunic, maybe even a hooded cloak if your family's managed not to pawn it. Wool keeps you warm until it gets wet. Then it becomes an itchy, soaking sponge that takes 3 days to dry. Everything you wear is hand-sewn, hand-dyed, and hand-me-down. Stitching is uneven, colors are muddy, and there's a decent chance the garment has patches from at least 3 different eras. You might be wearing your uncle's old shirt and your cousin's old pants, repurposed from his cousin's cousin. Fashion isn't the goal, survival is. And even if you're dressing up, the best you can hope for is a slightly less moth-eaten cloak. Shoes? Maybe. If you have them, they're made of rough leather with no sole to speak of. Rain seeps in immediately, and the stitching cuts into your heels. Laces are just strips of hide, and you'll be tying them again and again all day. Historians still debate how many sets of clothing a typical peasant owned. Some think 2, one for everyday wear and one for best. Others believe most people lived in a single outfit for weeks or months, mending it nightly and hoping the seasons changed gently. Either way, as you tug your sleeves over raw skin and scratch your shoulder for the 5th time, you realize there's no such thing as comfortable clothing in this century. Getting dressed with ties, laces, and pins, you'd think that putting on a tunic and some breeches would be straightforward. But no. Getting dressed in medieval times is a process, a daily negotiation between cloth, twine, pins, and your own aching fingers. Your clothing doesn't just slip on. It ties, it wraps, it laces, and it very occasionally pokes you when you're not looking. Let's start with your breeches, or if you're more fashion-forward, hosen. These are basically long woolen tubes that cling to your legs. They're held up not by an elastic waistband or even a belt, but by laces that you thread through the waistband of your brays, which are your medieval underwear. Picture this. You're standing there, shivering in a smoky room, trying to lace one garment to another, while praying the cords haven't snapped in the night. The knots never sit right, and if you tug too hard, something comes loose later when you're bending over in public. Then come the sleeves. Sleeves, in many medieval outfits, aren't sewn onto the tunic. They're separate pieces, tied on with leather thongs, or pinned with sharp bits of bone or metal. This gives your wardrobe versatility, but really just means you're stabbing yourself in the biceps at least once before breakfast. If you're a woman, you might be working with a fitted kirtle, which requires someone else to help lace up the back. If you live alone, you get inventive with elbows, teeth, and a stick. Everything takes time. You're not hopping out of bed and ready in 5 minutes. Dressing is a 20-minute ritual, longer if your only light source is the hearth and someone's blocking it. You check your reflection in a pan of water. Crooked, frumpy, and vaguely itchy. Perfect. Historians still argue about how self-sufficient medieval folks were with clothing fastenings. Some suggest they were experts at tying, pinning, and adjusting. Others believe most people walked around slightly disheveled, because who had time to repin a sleeve in a thunderstorm? Either way, by the time you're fully dressed, you're already a little sweaty and completely over it, and you haven't even stepped outside yet. The underwear situation. It's complicated. Ah, yes, medieval underwear. You didn't think you were going to skip it, did you? Because believe it or not, even in a time when personal hygiene was more theory than practice, people still wore undergarments. Sort of. Depending on your gender, your class, and how cold it was, your underwear could range from a respectable linen layer to nothing at all. For men, the base layer was the braise, loose-fitting shorts made of linen, or if you were poor, coarsely woven wool. They were baggy, tied with a drawstring at the waist, and looked vaguely like modern boxers, if modern boxers were homemade and came with a draft. On top of that came the hosen, which were like leggings but separate for each leg and sometimes joined at the top by more lacing, meaning, yes, your underpants were often tied directly to your trousers. It's a system designed by someone who clearly never had to pee in a hurry. For women, the situation was even more ambiguous. Most lower-class women wore a long linen shift called a smock or chemise as their base layer. That's it. No underpants in the modern sense. Those didn't become popular in Europe until the 19th century. Some noble women may have experimented with drawers, but for most women, the chemise was underwear, nightgown, and sweat rag all in one. It rarely got washed. It often doubled as a towel. What makes things even more fun is that everyone sees your underwear at some point. Laundry day, public baths, wind gusts, clumsy accidents. And what you wear underneath says a lot about your status. If your linen is soft, white, and mended well, people assume you're doing all right. If it's yellowed, stiff, or falling apart, well, so is your reputation. Historians still argue over how widespread undergarments were for the working poor. Some believe peasants simply skipped layers to save time and cloth. Others argue that the linen shift was so essential, it was one of the only garments people prioritized owning. Either way, as you shift uncomfortably in your scratchy, slightly damp braise, you realize that medieval underwear offers minimal support, zero privacy, and absolutely no comfort. Social status shown through uncomfortable clothes. Now that you're dressed, after a full-body struggle with string, sweat, and sharp objects, you step outside and immediately begin to be judged. Not by your words or deeds, of course, but by your sleeves. Or your hat, or whether your shoes have any kind of pointy toe. In the medieval world, fashion is law. Literally. Sumptuary laws dictate who can wear what, depending on your social status. Silk. Off limits unless you're nobility. Fur. Maybe if you're clergy. Colors. Hope you like brown, gray, and vaguely greenish mud. You pass someone in a red-dyed tunic, clearly showing off. Red dye is expensive. imported from faraway lands and often reserved for the church or very wealthy merchants. You tug at your own brownish-beige sackcloth and try not to look envious. Your cloak, patched and re-stitched for the 5th time, is serviceable, but that tear at the hem, people notice. They always notice. Hats, too, speak volumes. A flat cap says peasant. A feathered hat says, I'm someone's cousin at court. And if you're wearing a hood with liripipes, those long dangly tails, you might be fashionable or just asking to get them caught in a door. Women's fashion is no easier. A married woman is expected to wear a head covering, not for warmth, but for modesty. Your hair is hidden, your neckline high, and your sleeves, well, those vary depending on your station. Tightly fitted and long if you're wealthy, rolled and damp if you're doing laundry. The worst part, all of it itches, every bit of it, and you can't strip it off without sending a message. Clothes aren't just protection from the cold. They're armor, signal, and straitjacket rolled into one. Historians still debate how strictly sumptuary laws were enforced, especially among the lower classes. Some argue they were mostly symbolic, others point to real penalties. But for you, it's enough to know that one too bright tunic could get you fined, or worse, noticed. A day in the fields with no gloves, with your itchy, patched-up outfit cinched and laced in all the right places, or at least close enough, you head out to begin your workday. And because you are not one of the lucky few living in a castle with an inherited estate, that workday begins in the fields. The sun is barely up, and the earth is cold and damp underfoot. Your boots, such as they are, do little to stop the chill from seeping into your bones. You carry a wooden hoe or perhaps a clunky iron-tipped spade, its handle polished smooth, not by craftsmanship, but by decades of other hands gripping it in the same spot. There are no gloves. Leather is too precious to waste on your fingertips, and wool just soaks up the morning dew and makes things worse. So you grip the tool with bare hands, hands already blistered, calloused, and occasionally bleeding. Dirt cakes under your nails within minutes. The cold cracks your knuckles by noon. Your job varies by season. In spring, you might be sowing barley or oats, breaking up clumps of earth that have frozen into lumpy iron. In summer, you're weeding with your fingernails because your sickle is dull and there's no time to stop. In autumn, it's the harvest, back-breaking work that means bending over for hours. And in winter, you're probably clearing brush or mending fences, because nothing ever truly stops. You work in silence, mostly. The occasional grunt, curse, or belch punctuates the rhythm of toil. Maybe someone starts a song, one of those slow, repetitive melodies meant to match the swing of a hoe. You hum along because there's nothing else to do and no end in sight. Meals are taken in the field, a hunk of bread in one hand, a sliver of onion in the other. Water, if you're feeling bold. Ale, if someone remembered the flask. The break is short and the work continues. Historians still argue over how many hours peasants actually labored. Some sources claim surprising amounts of free time between religious holidays, while others insist the days were long, brutal, and unrelenting. But as your back starts to spasm and your hands throb with cold, it's hard to believe anyone would describe this life as leisurely. Noble obligations that also somehow suck. Now, if you happen to be one of the rare few born into the noble class, you might think you've dodged the drudgery of the peasantry. No mucking out stables, no cracked fingernails, no chasing runaway pigs across a turnip field. But don't start polishing your silver spoon just yet. Being nobility in medieval times comes with its own brand of exhausting nonsense. First, forget leisure. Your day is rigidly scheduled, packed with meetings, obligations, and ceremonies that stretch into eternity. You're summoned at dawn to attend prayers with the household priest, even if you were up late drinking wine that tasted suspiciously like vinegar. Then it's time to check in on your estate's affairs. making sure tenants are paying their rents in eggs, grain, or promises, listening to disputes about boundary stones or missing chickens, and pretending to care deeply about whether or not the miller's apprentice winked at the Reeves' daughter. Then there are appearances to maintain. Literally, you're expected to wear a dozen layers of itchy, impractical garments, topped with a mantle that weighs as much as your ego. You sit in a great hall, on a chair that looks impressive but has no lumbar support, listening to minstrels play the same 3 songs over and over while pretending to enjoy a boiled mutton stew that's already cold. You must act as host, diplomat, landlord, and minor judge, settling disputes, greeting visiting nobles, and keeping an eye out for someone trying to poison the wine or steal your best hunting hound. And let's not forget your military obligations. When the king calls, you're expected to muster a small army and ride into battle, whether you know which end of a sword to hold or not. Historians still debate whether noble life was significantly more comfortable than peasant life. Sure, the beds were softer, the food was richer, and the clothes were cleaner. But the pressure to maintain status, manage land, and perform constant public duties made for its own kind of misery. Especially when your favorite pastime, hawking, results in a falcon biting your ear, the toll on your spine and soul. By midday, whether you're peasant or noble, your body is starting to protest loudly. If you're a field worker, you've been bending, lifting, dragging, and carrying for hours. There's no ergonomic shovel, no padded kneelers, and certainly no brakes, unless your tools break first. Your back feels like it's been folded in half and stapled. You lean on your hoe and stretch, only to be shouted at by the reeve, who thinks idle hands are the devil's workshop. If you're a noble, don't think you're off the hook. You've been sitting straight-backed through prayers, balancing on horseback during patrols, and wearing a belt dagger that digs into your ribs every time you breathe too deeply. And if you're a lady of rank, your corset, or what passes for one, is cinched so tight that standing upright feels like a part-time job. You spend your day sewing, managing household staff, and hosting visitors while hiding the fact that your entire torso has gone numb. The pain is constant, but no one talks about it. There's no ibuprofen, no chiropractor. The closest thing to physical therapy is getting accidentally kicked by a cow and realigning your spine by chance. You might try herbal remedies, comfrey salves, willow bark tea, but these are only as effective as the hands preparing them. And most of those hands are also shaking from exhaustion. As the sun rises higher, you start to calculate how long you can last before collapsing in a pile of damp straw. You dream of baths, soft cushions, and stretching your legs without immediate regret. Historians still debate whether medieval people experienced pain differently due to their constant physical labor. Some argue their bodies were simply tougher. Others suggest that they endured pain in silence because they had no other option. Either way, your spine is singing a mournful tune, and your soul might be humming along. You smell like manure, and no one cares. You pause to wipe your forehead with the back of your hand, smearing a streak of sweat and dirt across your brow. Then you catch it. That smell, it's you. You smell like wet wool, onions, and, yes, definitely manure. But so does everyone else. In fact, if you didn't reek by noon, people might think you were either sick or suspicious. Working in the fields means manure is part of your daily life. You spread it, step in it, smell it, sometimes even sleep near it, especially if your cottage shares a wall with a livestock shed. Manure is currency, compost, and curse, all in one. It helps your crops grow, but it also helps the flies thrive. And there are so many flies. They follow you in lazy spirals, dive-bombing your face like tiny airborne knights in buzzing armor. There's no deodorant, no scented soap. A sprig of rosemary behind your ear is the closest thing to perfume, And even that wilts by lunchtime. Your clothes soak up every odor, and washing them means hauling them to the stream and pounding them with rocks. You don't have time for that today, or tomorrow, or maybe ever. But no one judges. Smell is universal. The baker reeks of yeast and ash. The shepherd, wet dog and despair. Even the priest, cloaked in incense and holy Latin, has a certain earthy bouquet. It's just how things are. Historians still argue whether people were nose-blind to these smells or simply tolerant. Some records suggest visitors from cleaner cities recoiled in horror, while locals seemed unfazed. For you, the scent of your own sweat and soil has become as familiar as your name, and just as unavoidable. Prices, bartering, and yelling over fish. By early afternoon, your aching feet carry you to the town market, a chaotic maze of shouting, snorting, and the overwhelming perfume of raw fish. This is the heart of the medieval economy, where actual coins are rare, haggling is an art form, and everything smells like herring. You weave through stalls made of wood, canvas, and hope, looking for something, anything, that won't cost your entire month's worth of onions. You pass a fishmonger bellowing about his freshest trout in town as flies gather in enthusiastic clouds above his wares. Caught this morning, he insists, which morning is unclear. A woman argues with him, brandishing a cod and demanding a discount for the smell alone. You don't blame her. The fish is eyeing you in a way that says, don't. You need flour, but coins are in short supply. Instead, you offer part of a wax candle and a few duck eggs, still warm because your neighbor's hen blessed you today. The merchant eyes your goods suspiciously, rubs them between his fingers like a jeweler inspecting sapphires, then shrugs and nods. Barter accepted. You both know you got the worst deal, but you need the flour more than your pride. All around, voices rise in a medley of commerce. A man sells leeches. A boy hawks goose feathers. A woman quietly offers herbs with knowing eyebrows. Whether for cooking or curses is anyone's guess. Chickens squawk, pigs squeal, a dog makes off with someone's apple, and in the middle of it all, a beggar plays a hurdy-gurdy so badly it feels personal. There are no price tags, no receipts, and certainly no consumer protections. It's loud, it's messy, and it's somehow the highlight of your week. Historians still debate how common coin-based transactions were for peasants. Many believe barter remained the primary method for daily trade, with coins used mostly for taxes or legal fines. But no matter the currency, the volume of the shouting is always free. Spoiled food, fake weights, and creative sales tricks. You reach a stall selling apples that look respectable. Not shiny, of course. No medieval apple ever gleamed. But not obviously worm-ridden either. The merchant smiles too much. Only bruised on the one side, he insists, as he flips the fruit carefully to display the unblemished half. You lean closer. The bruise is the size of Normandy. You buy one anyway. This is medieval marketing at its finest. Deception, optimism, and outright lies. There are no rules, no inspections, and no Better Business Bureau. If you're sold a sack of flour mixed with chalk or lentils that turn out to be weevil playgrounds, your only recourse is to shout. Loudly, possibly while shaking a stick. Weights are a scam too. Merchants keep a heavier set of stones for buying and a lighter set for selling. Your pound of grain weighs suspiciously light today, but what can you do? The man has 3 teeth and a dagger. You take your loss and move on. Wines are watered, cheeses are rebranded, and meats are ambiguous. That venison sausage. Probably goat. That fresh egg might predate your birth. You've learned to sniff everything, inspect everything, and ask nothing. Suspicion is survival. Some vendors go further with theatrical flair. One man claims his onions are blessed by monks. Another swears his honeycomb cures the common cold. A bold claim considering no one's entirely sure what a cold even is. There's a woman selling pies so fragrant you briefly forget your skepticism, until you notice the crust is mostly bark and the filling might be mouse. Historians still argue whether these market deceptions were tolerated, expected, or occasionally punished. Some local officials did inspect goods and enforce basic fairness. Others accepted bribes, turned blind eyes, or simply didn't care. For you, each purchase is a gamble, and the odds are rarely in your favor. Entertainers, pickpockets, and pigs on leashes. As you edge your way deeper into the market square, the chaos somehow intensifies. A juggler balances knives while standing on a barrel that rolls unpredictably toward a spice merchant's cart. A crowd gathers, gasping, clapping, and nearly trampling a basket of live geese. Over there, a man with soot-streaked cheeks pretends to swallow fire, though from the grimace on his face it might have been real this time. Street entertainers are everywhere, earning their coin by distracting the crowd from their buyer's remorse. You pause to watch a puppet show staged atop an overturned crate. The marionettes shout in high-pitched voices, reenacting the tale of a knight who lost his pants in battle. The children howl with laughter. The adults chuckle too, though half are secretly checking their pouches. Because, while jesters dance and music plays, hands are wandering. Pickpockets adore markets. They're not slick professionals. They're boys with fast fingers and practiced grins. A bump here, a spilled basket there, and suddenly your only coin is missing. You pat your belt pouch just to be sure. Still there, for now. Nearby, a nobleman's servant struggles to hold back a pig on a leash, which squeals and resists like it knows it's dinner. Pigs in medieval towns often roam free, eating garbage and causing trouble. Some are pet pigs in the loosest sense, more garbage disposal units than companions. But this one is leashed, possibly part of a street act, or maybe someone's miscalculated dowry gift. A man walks past wearing a mask made of painted bark, shouting rhymes about sin and sausages. You're not sure if he's a preacher or a prankster. Maybe both. Historians still debate how regulated these market performers were. Some towns issued licenses. Others tolerated them until they caused trouble. Either way, the line between amusement and anarchy is very, very thin. And with every juggled axe, swiped purse, and runaway pig, you're reminded that shopping in the Middle Ages is never just about shopping. Market gossip and dangerous deals gone wrong. The market isn't just for food and entertainment. It's the medieval version of social media. Every whispered scandal, exaggerated boast, and third-hand tale finds its way to someone's ears between cabbage stalls. And today's hottest gossip. Someone found a rat in the baker's flour bin. You hear it from 3 different people in 3 different ways. The rat was dead, the rat was alive, the rat was baked into a pie. No one really knows, but everyone agrees it's hilarious and deeply unsettling. You listen, eavesdrop, and let's be honest, contribute. You mention, casually, that the cooper's wife hasn't been seen in days. Within moments, a woman leans in and whispers that she ran off with a priest. Someone else insists it was a traveling falconer. No one stops to question it. But not all gossip is harmless. Deals go wrong here, fights break out. A man shouts that he was sold rotten eggs. Another swings a dried fish like a club. You keep your distance, pretending to admire some onions, while carefully watching which way the fish lands. Disputes can escalate quickly. If no one calms things down, the town watch might intervene. The guards wear mismatched armor and carry clubs with more rust than authority. They break up brawls, not out of justice, but because too much noise scares off the merchants. And God forbid someone overturn a honey stall again. It took days to scrub that mess off the cobbles. Then there are deals that go beyond vegetables and cheese. A man in the corner whispers about relics, authentic saint bones and miracle water from a well blessed by a bishop's cousin. Another offers exotic spices that are just colored sand. And there's always someone dealing in questionable charms. Love potions, lucky rocks, curses. All for a price. Historians still argue whether medieval people believed these scams or just played along. Either way, you clutch your hard-won flower like it's treasure and head home. The market has drained your coin pouch, your energy, and possibly your faith in humanity, but at least you made it out without being pickpocketed. You think, what happens when you sneeze near a barber? It starts with a tickle, just a faint itch in the back of your nose. You try to hold it back, but your luck ran out 3 stall visits ago. You sneeze loudly, and that's when the barber, sitting idly with his bloodletting basin, looks up like a wolf catching the scent of something faintly ill and moderately profitable. "Feeling unwell, are we?" he says with a grin too wide for comfort. You shake your head, but it's too late. The barber surgeon is already launching into a pitch about humors and bad air, claiming your sneeze is a clear sign your black bile is imbalanced, or maybe it's phlegm. He'll decide after poking around your neck for a bit. He gestures to the chair outside his shop, a high-backed wooden monstrosity stained with stories best left untold. The tools of his trade glint on a tray, knives, hooks, tweezers, and leeches basking in a shallow dish like tiny aquatic henchmen. He offers you a discount on a leeching. You politely decline. He offers you a mild trepanning instead, just in case the problem is cranial. You run. Barber surgeons aren't just haircutters in the medieval world. They're your dentist, surgeon, and unofficial therapist all in one. And while some are skilled, others are enthusiastic at best. Bloodletting is the go-to treatment for just about everything. Got a fever? Let's drain you. Aching joints? A little bleeding should help. Trouble sleeping? Perhaps a leech on the temple. You sneeze again, bad timing, and a bystander crosses themselves. Another backs away. A third tells you to chew sage and sleep with garlic in your sock. At this rate, you'll be wearing herbs like jewelry before dinner. Historians still debate how effective medieval barber surgeons really were. Some argue their practices were dangerously outdated. Others say they offered the best care available at the time, which, granted, is a very low bar. But you, in this moment, just want to get home, without anyone else trying to drain you of fluids or sell you another bad-smelling poultice. Bleeding, purging, and cures worse than the illness. You make it a few paces before someone else spots your unfortunate sniffle. This time, it's not a barber. It's the town apothecary's apprentice, barely old enough to shave, but already radiating the smug confidence of someone who owns a mortar and pestle. He eyes you critically and declares, "Your complexion's off. You've got too much heat in the liver." Before you can protest, he begins listing treatments with the enthusiasm of a medieval sommelier. Bleeding, of course, is top of the list. A few quick slices to the forearm with a cleanish blade, and you'll be balanced. If that doesn't work, try purging. He offers you a small satchel of powdery herbs meant to move the bowels decisively. You know what that means. Buckle up. Another option? Emetics, a cheerful tea that will help you vomit out whatever demon is troubling your insides. There's also cupping, heating little glass jars and sticking them to your back to draw out illness. And don't forget mustard plasters, boiled onions applied to the feet, or the ever-popular method of applying a dead pigeon to your chest. For the fever, obviously, you decline each in turn. But the suggestions keep coming. Cow dung poultices, burnt snail shell tonics, a warm compress of goose grease and sage. One woman insists you sniff dried toad powder. "Cures everything," she says, then promptly sneezes into her apron. The treatments themselves often feel worse than the symptoms. Bleeding leaves you weak. Purging leaves you, let's just say, empty. And vomiting, well, it's a public spectacle. But in a world without antibiotics, with no real understanding of germs, These methods feel like action, like hope. Even if you're lying face down in your own regret afterward. Historians still argue whether these cures had placebo effects or were genuinely harmful. Some point out that mild bloodletting may have relieved high blood pressure. Others note that frequent vomiting and diarrhea probably just made things worse. But either way, you're now dodging both barbers and apprentices, clinging to the hope that this sniffle doesn't turn into something more medically interesting. Astrology as medical advice. You finally duck behind a merchant's wagon, gasping for a moment of peace. And that's when an elderly man in a wide-brimmed hat and star-embroidered robe sidles up beside you. "You were born under Saturn, weren't you?" he asks, as if you've just confessed to having chronic sneezing fits and moral weakness. You're too tired to argue. He takes your silence as confirmation. This is your introduction to the medieval medical astrologer. In the absence of microbiology, anatomy textbooks, or germ theory, many physicians turn to the heavens for answers. If you're sick, it's not just about humors or balance. It's about the position of Mars, the mood of the moon, and whether or not Mercury is throwing shade at your spleen. The man produces a rolled-up chart, covered in circles, animals, and symbols that look vaguely like angry ducks. "Ah, yes," he murmurs, pointing to a squiggle. "Mars is in your house of digestion. No wonder you feel off. You must avoid lentils, arguments, and walking near sheep." You blink. Astrological medicine in the Middle Ages wasn't a fringe idea. It was a deeply respected tool in the healing toolkit. Doctors would consult charts before performing surgery, bloodletting, or even administering a herbal tonic. Certain zodiac signs ruled specific body parts. Aries for the head, Taurus for the neck, Virgo for the intestines. If the moon was in the wrong phase, they might delay a procedure, or worse, blame you for getting sick at the wrong time. You're told to avoid eating hot foods while Venus is in retrograde, and to sleep with your feet pointing north until the next full moon. You nod politely, back away slowly, and consider whether hiding in a barrel might be your best remaining option. Historians still debate how seriously this astrological advice was taken across all classes. Some suggest it was mostly used by elites or university-trained physicians. Others argue it filtered all the way down to folk healers and housewives. But here and now, it's yet another layer of confusing, questionably helpful input surrounding your increasingly controversial sneeze. Herbal lore, amulets, and miraculous treatments. By now, you're ready to hide under a cart until sunset. But as fate would have it, an old woman approaches, swathed in layers of shawls and mystery. Her fingers are stained green from crushed leaves, and she smells like mint, smoke, and possibly cats. She gives you a knowing look, one that suggests she's diagnosed your ailment from 20 paces. "You're out of balance," she says. You nod. At this point, you'll believe anything. She reaches into a pouch and produces a small bundle wrapped in cloth and tied with hair. "For the humors," she whispers. You open it gently to find dried nettle, a twist of rosemary, and something you hope is a piece of ginger. She insists you boil it in goat's milk and drink it under a waxing moon while facing east. "Don't blink too much," she adds gravely. "This is folk medicine, part tradition, part observation, and part pure theatrical flair." She pulls out a small bag of dried sage leaves, cloves, and lavender. "Steep this for your lungs," she says, "and sleep with it under your pillow." You glance into her basket and see a jar labeled mole foot oil. You don't ask. She also sells amulets, small pouches to wear around your neck, each containing a blend of herbs, stones, and possibly bits of old shoe leather. One promises protection from fever. Another wards off curses. A third smells exactly like fish, but is meant to help you dream of treasure. You buy the cheapest one just in case. Not everything she offers is nonsense. Some of her remedies, chamomile for calm, yarrow for wounds, have real, time-tested benefits. But others are pure hope, packaged in twine and superstition. Still, there's something soothing in her quiet voice and the ritual of it all. You feel just a bit better. Placebo? Maybe. Magic. You don't rule it out. Historians still debate how much herbal knowledge was scientifically useful versus symbolic or spiritual. Many remedies had empirical roots, passed down through generations, even if their explanations were steeped in folklore. But in a world where most cures hurt more than helped, the village herbalist might be your gentlest option. The brutal work of medieval laundry. If you thought washing clothes in medieval times was a breezy stroll through a sunlit meadow, you are in for a sudsy slap of reality. Laundry day is back-breaking, knuckle-scraping labor, and there's a reason no one looks forward to it. You haul your sack of linen down to the local stream or public washhouse, where other equally grim-faced souls are already elbow-deep in freezing water and frothy buckets. Your tools? Lye soap, ash, maybe some stale urine if you're committed. That's not a joke. Stale urine, known as chamber lye, is actually prized for its ammonia content, helping lift out grease and stains. Of course, it also lifts out your sense of dignity. You soak your tunic in the mixture, holding your breath and hoping your neighbors aren't in a teasing mood today. Next comes scrubbing, on a wooden board, or over a flat rock near the riverbank. You slam the fabric down again and again, the sound echoing through the crisp morning air like some communal rhythm of pain. Your fingers are raw, your nails dark with grime. If you're lucky, the sun is out to warm your bones. If you're not, you're shivering under overcast skies, your breath mixing with steam from your own effort. Drying is another gamble. If it rains, you're done for. If the geese get into your laundry line, you'll be chasing a pair of woolen hose across a muddy yard. If someone accidentally borrows your best smock, good luck proving ownership. It's all patchwork and stains anyway. Historians still debate how often medieval folks laundered their clothing. Some argue that undergarments were washed weekly, while outer garments waited longer stretches. Others suggest most people relied on air drying and vigorous beating to get the worst out. Regardless, by mid-afternoon your arms ache, your clothes are damp and wrinkled, and your sense of accomplishment is buried beneath a pile of still wet linens. How gossip worked like courtroom trials. While you're scrubbing, you can't help but listen. Medieval laundry spots aren't just for cleaning clothes. They're the local courtrooms, confessionals, and rumor mills rolled into one. Every woman there has a story, a suspicion, or a cousin who swears it happened exactly that way. The washerwoman to your left leans in, whispers that the blacksmith's apprentice has been sneaking into the cooper's garden at night. Why? No one knows, but it might involve fermented plums. Another woman insists she saw the baker's wife with a traveling friar. It was not proper, whatever that means, and now there's a wager over whether she'll show up to church on Sunday. Gossip in this world isn't idle chatter. It's a form of power. Reputations are made and ruined by the riverbank. A single rumor, repeated with just the right amount of side-eye, can snowball into a public shaming or even legal trouble. People have been fined, punished, or worse, all because someone said something while wringing out a pair of breeches. You keep your mouth shut. Mostly, but it's hard not to join in when everyone's laughing about the tanner who mistook a chamber pot for stew seasoning. You chuckle quietly, even though part of you wonders if that tale was originally about someone else. Historians still argue how much gossip influenced formal medieval justice systems. In tight-knit villages, word of mouth often held more sway than written testimony, and when the local reeve is your cousin's brother-in-law, hearsay is basically law. You wring out your linen shift and think carefully before saying anything someone might repeat tomorrow. Louder. women's lives under church, law, and superstition. As your laundry steams in the midday sun, you consider, briefly, just how complicated a woman's life can be in this time. The church tells you to be humble and obedient. The law tells you to be invisible unless accused. And superstition fills in the rest with cautionary tales and ominous warnings. If you're unmarried, people watch you. If you laugh too loud, walk too late, or wear too much color, whispers follow. If you're married, your identity becomes tethered to your husband's whims. If you're widowed, half the village assumes you're a witch, and the other half wants to marry you for your goose. Even tasks like cooking, weaving, or tending herbs are watched through a veil of suspicion. Did your bread rise too well? Maybe you used sorcery. Is your child sick? Did you anger the saints? A mole on your arm, a birthmark, or just bad luck can brand you as unnatural. Still, women find ways to build quiet power, through networks of favors, sharp tongues, and deep knowledge of the home, the hearth, and the hidden. You've seen the midwife silence a lord with one glare. You've watched the alewife bend laws with a jug and a grin. You've heard a nun recite scripture so sharp it could cut iron. Historians still debate the exact limitations and freedoms of medieval women. Some argue women held more economic and legal power than once thought. Others highlight centuries of oppression and silence. But here, now, your hands deep in soap-slick water, you feel both the weight and the wit it takes to survive in a world where every glance can become a judgment. What happens if your tunic is too short? You stand, stretch your aching back, and reach for your drying tunic, only to discover it's shrunk. Again. It clings oddly at the waist, rises just a bit too far above your knees, and you suddenly feel like you're being watched. You are. Because in medieval towns, clothing isn't just clothing, it's regulation. Sumptuary laws dictate the appropriate length of sleeves, depth of necklines, and, yes, the decency of hemlines. A tunic too short. It's not just a wardrobe issue, it's a moral one. Someone might assume you're loose, or worse, pretentious. A neighbor eyes you, eyebrows raised. A passing priest coughs meaningfully. Somewhere someone mutters something about decency and the fall of Rome. You tug your tunic downward as discreetly as you can and begin calculating whether you can get away with layering an apron over it. Violations of dress code, especially for women, can be taken seriously. You've heard stories of women fined, scolded in public, even denied entry to church for a garment considered too flamboyant or revealing. For men, it's no better. Slashed sleeves or pointed shoes too long can earn accusations of vanity, or worse, devilry. Historians still debate whether these rules were strictly enforced or mainly symbolic, but the pressure remains. You feel it in the stares, the whispers, and the way you suddenly wish your laundry had taken just a little longer to dry, sweating in wool under a burning sun. By afternoon, the sun is doing its best impression of a furnace, and you're stuck in the exact outfit that made sense when the morning air was ice. Now, you're marinating in wool. Thick, coarse, non-breathable wool that absorbs heat like a sponge and traps it like a personal oven strapped to your back. Your tunic clings. Your underlayers itch more than ever. Your head is sweating under your hood, and your armpits feel like swamps in a linen cage. The thing is, medieval people dressed for survival, not comfort. Even in warm weather, you're wearing layers. Because clothes aren't just clothes, they're status, decency, and protection against the elements, even when the elements turn against you. There's no concept of seasonal wardrobe when you've got 2 tunics to your name, both of them scratchy and equally miserable. You're working or trying to, whether in the field, in the forge, or at the bakehouse. The sun glares down, and there's no sunscreen. Hats help, but not much. You can drink water if it's not too foul, and you might even find a bit of shade. But mostly you just sweat, a lot, and with sweat comes smell. Bathing is still a few days away, maybe weeks, so the best you can hope for is to stand downwind from everyone else. The worst? That your sweat mixes with the dust and grime until your skin starts to chafe and rash. There's no ointment for that, just a gritted smile and a hope that you'll get through the week without heat stroke. Historians still debate how medieval folks coped with heat, especially during labor-intensive summers. Some suggest they took midday breaks, siestas essentially, while others believe work simply carried on until collapse. What's clear is that medieval clothing rarely changed with the season, and staying cool was a luxury only afforded to those wealthy enough to sit still in the shade. For you, every drop of sweat is a reminder that wool is eternal, and the sun never takes pity. The nose knows medieval city smells. As you shuffle down the lane in your soggy wool prison, your nose is under siege. The air itself feels alive, a swirling cocktail of stenches that change with every step. One moment, it's the acrid tang of tannery runoff. The next, it's the fishmonger's stall, where scales, guts, and fish heads bake in the sun like forgotten offerings to a very cruel god. The scent wafts into your mouth, and suddenly you wish you'd skipped breakfast, or at least chewed mint leaves for 3 hours straight. Cities in the medieval world do not smell nice. That's not a judgment, it's a biological reality. No plumbing, no waste removal, no disinfectants. Instead, you've got chamber pots emptied into the streets, horses doing their business wherever they please, and people spitting, dumping, and relieving themselves anywhere that seems convenient. Alleyways become unofficial latrines, and the gutters overflow with a putrid mix of rainwater, offal, and yesterday's soup gone rogue. You pass a butcher's shop. A dog is gnawing on something unidentifiable near the doorway. Flies buzz in clouds, thick and lazy. You hold your breath, which only makes things worse when you finally have to exhale again. Down the street, a tanner is boiling hides in urine and lime. The smell is eye-watering. They say you get used to it. You never really do. If you're in a port town, the added layers of tar, fish, and ship bilge only enhance the experience. If you're inland, it's livestock, damp hay, and the occasional whiff of someone's feet, unleashed from boots not cleaned since Epiphany. Perfume, when it's used, isn't to smell good, it's to smell less bad. Historians still debate whether people in the medieval period were less sensitive to smell or simply more resigned to it. Some evidence suggests cities were aware of their own foulness. There are records of fines for dumping waste too near homes, or for maintaining an especially offensive pigsty. But overall, the olfactory landscape of a medieval city is a pungent reminder that modern sanitation is one of civilization's finest inventions. Shaming punishments, stocks, and dung-flinging. You're trying to escape the worst of the heat and the ever-evolving fragrance of the city when a crowd catches your eye near the town square. A man is locked in the stocks, his head and hands pinned by heavy wooden boards, his face sunburnt and weary. Children gather around him with suspiciously full baskets. You already know what's coming. A tomato whizzes through the air. Misses. Then a cabbage. Closer. Then a direct hit. Someone launches a lump of old dung that lands with a squelch no one should ever have to hear. The crowd erupts in laughter. The man groans. Welcome to justice, medieval style. Public shaming is both punishment and entertainment. Petty crimes like theft, gossip, or selling watered-down ale land you in the stocks or the pillory, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. People are encouraged to jeer, throw food, and occasionally get creative with their insults. It's justice by humiliation, and it's wildly popular. Some unlucky souls are paraded through town wearing signs listing their crimes. Adulterer, cheater, or pig thief. Others are made to wear humiliating outfits, pointy hats, mismatched shoes, or robes emblazoned with symbols of their disgrace. There's even a woman being marched past you now with a loaf of stale bread tied around her neck, apparently a punishment for short-changing customers at her bakery. You make a mental note to never shop there again. Worse yet, the punishments don't always stop at embarrassment. For more serious offenses, the town executioner might step in. He's not always killing people, but he is the one who brands, whips, or even clips off body parts when the court demands it. His apron is stained, and his expression is unreadable. You hope you never see him at work again. Historians still debate how effective these punishments were at deterring crime. Some argue they reinforced community values and deterred bad behavior. Others point out that they often became more about spectacle than justice. Either way, you find yourself inching backward as someone else picks up a suspiciously soft vegetable. You don't want to get caught in the crossfire, or worse, end up in the stocks yourself for loitering with too much curiosity. When your lunch hour turns into a spectacle, you finally retreat from the square, stomach rumbling and dignity intact, for now. You wander over to the edge of the market where people gather with their midday meals. But just as you unwrap your modest lunch, some leftover porridge and a bit of turnip, you hear another commotion. Because in medieval towns, lunch breaks and public performances often go hand in hand, and today's entertainment, a trial by ducking. A wooden platform has been set up beside the river. A woman, accused of being a scold, that is, of talking too much or too sharply, is being strapped to a ducking stool. It's a wooden chair attached to a long beam, balanced over the water like an oversized spatula. The crowd presses in, cheering, jeering, dropping breadcrumbs and placing casual wagers. You take a bite of your porridge just as the woman is dunked, emerging spluttering and wild-eyed. Someone shouts that she's learned her lesson. Another suggests one more dip might improve her manners. You quietly put down your food. It's not the only punishment with lunch hour flair. Traveling musicians perform between spectacles. Jugglers dodge half-eaten apples. And the local priest might step up on a crate to deliver a quick-fire sermon about sin and soup. You try to enjoy your meal, but the overlapping smells of garlic, sweat, and theatrical fear are not helping. Sometimes, the lunch crowd gathers for executions too. A thief sentenced to hang might find his last moments observed by a mixed audience of butchers, weavers, and children balancing bowls on their laps. It's morbid, but accepted. Death and dining served at once. Of course, not all lunch hour events are grim. There are jesters, animal shows, even small plays performed by traveling troops, though they often end in someone being fake stabbed, real slapped, or accidentally set on fire. But you've grown cautious. One poorly timed bite, and you'll be choking on boiled turnip during the town's latest round of public humiliation. Historians still debate whether these performances were intended primarily as justice, deterrent, or just free community theater. Probably all three. For now, you just pack up your lunch and look for a quieter corner, somewhere you can eat without worrying who's about to be dunked next. The relentless schedule of medieval worship, just as you finally find a quiet spot to finish your cold porridge. Far from ducking stools, dung missiles, and judgmental poultry, you hear them, the bells, again. You glance at the sky. Wasn't it just prime a moment ago? Apparently not. The rhythm of medieval life is set by church bells, and they don't care if you're in the middle of chewing or changing your socks. You brush off your tunic and head toward the chapel, or at least stand in its general direction. Everyone's expected to participate, or at least pretend. The bells ring 8 times a day: matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline, marking out the hours with the enthusiasm of a particularly bossy rooster. You don't go to everyone, unless you're a monk or you've lost a bet, but you definitely go to enough to feel it in your calves. You step into the dim stone church, the air immediately cooler and faintly mossy. It smells of candle wax, old incense, and something that might be centuries of whispered regrets. A priest mutters Latin, occasionally glancing up to be sure everyone's eyes are appropriately cast downward. You cross yourself, not because you entirely know why, but because not doing so would invite more trouble than it's worth. The service drones on. Someone coughs. Someone else mutters a prayer with impressive speed. A child starts sobbing near the back, instantly hushed by a grandmother, with reflexes honed over decades. You kneel, you stand. You sit, repeat. Even outside of formal prayer, religion governs your day. You don't swear oaths lightly. You cross yourself when sneezing. You avoid working on saints' days unless you're courting divine punishment, or the Reeve's wrath. You measure your sins in barley loaves and try to recall if gossiping counts as slander. It does. Historians still debate how devout everyday people truly were versus how much was performative. But in this world, faith is stitched into every hour like thread into a hem. The bells ring again, and you rise, your knees popping in protest. There's another prayer to say, another sin to consider, and still half a day left to get through. What it meant to sin in daily life. As you leave the church, blinking in the midday sun, you realize with a sigh that you've probably already sinned 5 times since breakfast. Maybe 6, depending on how the church is feeling about sarcasm this week. Sin in medieval life isn't reserved for grand betrayals or criminal acts. It's woven into the tiniest details of your routine. Thought a prideful thought. Sin. Laughed too loud during Mass. Sin. Coveted your neighbor's better-smelling turnips? That's envy, and yes, it counts too. The 7 deadly sins loom large. Pride, greed, lust, envy, gluttony, wrath, and sloth. You try to keep track, but sometimes you're not even sure what counts. Is eating a bit too much bread on a feast day gluttony? Or just enthusiasm? Was that comment about the Reeve's new haircut wrath, or just honesty? The lines blur. The church encourages constant self-monitoring. Priests remind you to confess regularly, to cleanse your soul of sin before it builds up like soot in a chimney. A good confession can ease your burden. A bad one might earn you penance, usually prayers, sometimes fasting. Occasionally something dramatic like crawling on your knees to a local shrine while reciting psalms and regretting your birth. Some people carry small prayer books with lists of sins, helpfully itemized so you can tally your wrongs before bed like a spiritual accountant. Others just try to stay quiet and not attract attention, figuring that the less they say, the fewer chances they'll have to blaspheme, and let's not even get into the sin of thought. You're supposed to confess not only what you do, but what you imagine. Daydreaming about pushing your neighbor into the dung heap, sin. Imagining yourself as king or queen for a day, definitely sin. You start to feel guilty just thinking about thinking. Historians still debate how deeply the average person internalized these spiritual expectations. Some argue that most peasants followed the rules outwardly, without much inward concern. Others believe the church's influence was so constant, so inescapable, that guilt was as common as lice. Either way, you walk home counting sins on your fingers and wondering if envy, wrath, and despair can all apply to one badly tied hose. Pilgrimages, indulgences, and your eternal soul. As you pass a crumbling roadside cross on your way back from town, you pause. A group of dusty travelers kneels before it, murmuring prayers in soft Latin. They're pilgrims, on their way to a local shrine, or maybe even farther afield. You nod politely and move on, but part of you wonders if you should join them. After all, your soul has been feeling particularly imperiled lately. In medieval life, your eternal fate is never far from your thoughts. Heaven and hell aren't abstract ideas. They're constant companions. One wrong step, one unconfessed sin, and your soul could end up roasting for eternity. Which brings us to indulgences, a sort of celestial coupon system offered by the church to help shave time off your sentence in purgatory. Can't afford to go on pilgrimage? No problem. You can buy an indulgence. Want to reduce the punishment for stealing a loaf of bread, even if you were hungry? There's a parchment for that. Some indulgences are earned by donating to a church, others by attending specific masses, or kissing a relic so ancient it's mostly splinters now. But nothing beats the pilgrimage. Traveling to a holy site, Canterbury, Santiago, or even your local abbey's bone collection, shows devotion and earns points with heaven. Pilgrims wear badges or carry staffs to mark their journey, and while the road is often muddy, dangerous, and filled with suspicious tavern pies, it's a holy effort. Along the way, you confess your sins, endure hardships, and, if you're lucky, pick up a relic or two. You once considered a pilgrimage yourself, but the thought of walking 200 miles on shoes made of damp regret was discouraging. Still, it's tempting. Your soul could use the help. And you hear they're handing out indulgence letters for just a few pennies, complete with a red wax seal and everything. Historians still debate whether indulgences were widely understood or simply accepted as spiritual insurance. Some argue they were abused by corrupt clergy. Others see them as a genuine reflection of medieval piety. Either way, you fold your hands, offer a quick prayer, and promise, again, to get your act together, maybe next Lent. Why sneezing might make you suspicious. Later that afternoon, just when you think you've survived the day's quota of sin, spectacle, and spiritual anxiety, someone nearby sneezes. A loud one, sharp and sudden. Heads turn. For a moment the world stills. Then someone crosses themselves. Another mutters a hasty, "God bless." A third eyes the sneezer, as though they might sprout horns and start speaking in tongues. In medieval times, sneezing is no small matter. It's a bodily event loaded with superstition, fear, and meaning. Some believe a sneeze expels evil spirits. Others claim it opens the body to them. The moment you sneeze, your soul might momentarily slip out. Or worse, something else might slip in. Hence the near-universal instinct to say, "God bless you," not out of politeness, but as a mini-exorcism. If you sneeze too much, too hard, or at the wrong time, say, during Mass, you might be suspected of harboring disease, demonic influence, or poor moral hygiene. And heaven help you if someone sneezes and then drops dead. That's not just bad luck, it's a sign. Of what? Depends on who you ask. Could be divine judgment. Could be witchcraft. Could just be a coincidence. But don't expect the local priest to believe in coincidences. You recall a story from a neighboring village. Someone sneezed 3 times in a row and was told to sleep outside the town walls for a week. Just in case. Another tale tells of a man whose sneeze during a feast was taken as a sign from God, leading to an impromptu fast and a ruined roast goose. There are talismans for it too. Herb pouches tied to belts, cloves chewed in secret, special prayers whispered under one's breath. You've seen someone wear a toadstone in a ring, said to ward off ill humors brought on by sudden sneezes. You're not sure if it works, but they haven't been kicked out of town yet. Historians still argue how seriously people took these sneeze superstitions. Some believe they were half jokes, customs taken with a grain of salt and a pinch of garlic. Others insist the fear was very real, especially when disease was a constant threat and explanations were few. Either way, next time you feel a tickle in your nose, you stifle it hard. Eternal salvation might depend on it. Betrothals at birth and awkward unions. Just when you think life couldn't get more complicated than dodging sins and sneezing etiquette, someone mentions your cousin's wedding, specifically the one arranged when she was 7. You nod, unsurprised. In the medieval world, marriage is less about love and more about property, alliances, and survival. And betrothals, they start early, sometimes shockingly early. It's not uncommon for two families to agree on a future union while the bride and groom are still toddling around in wool diapers. The agreement is sealed with a handshake, a few tankards of ale, and occasionally a roasted goose. Love has nothing to do with it. The goal is to secure land, merge assets, or simply ensure that no one ends up marrying the neighbor's third son, who once tried to ride a goat through the parish garden. If you're part of a noble family, these arrangements can be political. A girl in Normandy might be promised to a boy in Flanders to keep the peace between pig farming territories. If you're a peasant, the negotiations are more about consolidating dowries and making sure your future in-laws own a decent thatch roof and a cow with most of its teeth. When the time comes, the marriage is confirmed by the church, but often only after the couple has already been living together, or at least caught talking suspiciously near a haystack. The ceremony might be lavish or laughably modest, but once it's done, it's done. Divorce isn't really on the menu. Annulment is possible, but it requires money, influence, and a convincing tale of spiritual misalignment or missing parts. Of course, not every marriage is smooth. Sometimes the couple hasn't seen each other since infancy. Sometimes they're cousins, close ones. Sometimes the bride is 14 and the groom is 38, with a limp and 5 surviving children. Everyone politely pretends that's normal. Historians still debate the exact ages and conditions under which medieval people married. Church law technically required consent and maturity, but in practice, maturity was often just another word for old enough to carry firewood. Either way, as you pass the parish notice board filled with new betrothal announcements, you start to wonder if you've been promised to someone without even knowing it. Better ask your aunt. Family dynamics inside one smoky room. Later that evening, you return home to the single room you share with, well, everyone. Your parents, your siblings, your grandparents, possibly a cousin or two, and at least one dog that no one formally adopted but now sleeps under the table. Privacy doesn't exist, not in layout, sound, or scent. Everything is everyone's business, and the concept of alone time is as mythical as dragons. The hearth is the center of it all, glowing dimly under a hanging pot of something vaguely stew-like. Smoke curls upward, then sideways, then back into your face. The chimney, if you even have one, is more of a hopeful hole than a functional exhaust. Your eyes water constantly, but everyone assures you that means it's working. You squeeze past your siblings to sit on a bench that doubles as a storage chest and triples as a very disappointing bed. Your little brother is braiding straw. Your older sister is picking fleas off her smock. Grandma is muttering about a dream she had in which the chickens foretold a good harvest. You all nod, because Grandma's dreams are taken seriously. Mostly. Every family has its roles. Your father spends his day laboring or negotiating rent payments with the local bailiff. Your mother runs the household with the quiet intensity of a queen with 6 unpaid advisors. Children help as soon as they can walk, hauling water, scaring crows, or patching holes in your shared tunic rotation. Elders advise, warn, and sometimes just repeat themselves until everyone gives up and agrees. Meals are communal, eaten from a single bowl or pot. If meat's available, it goes to the breadwinner or honored guest. Kids eat last, unless they're quick and sneaky. Conversation flows, gossip, prayers, songs, the occasional passive-aggressive comment about whose turn it is to clean the chamber pot. Historians still debate the extent of warmth versus hardship in medieval family life. Some sources suggest tight-knit cooperation and mutual care. Others paint a picture of strict hierarchy and constant stress. The truth likely varies from hearth to hearth, but tonight, as you lie shoulder to shoulder under a shared woolen blanket, you realize this crowded chaos is the only home you've ever known. And despite the noise, the smell, and someone's foot in your ribs, you almost don't mind. The drama of inheritance and lost sons. Just when you've settled into your smoky, crowded, mildly itchy home life, talk turns, yet again, to land. Who gets what? Who was promised what? And who conveniently forgot their promises? Inheritance is a serious business in medieval times, and if your family owns even a scrap of land, a half-dead pig, or a dented cauldron, someone's going to argue over it. Your uncle swears he was supposed to inherit the western pasture. Your cousin insists it was meant for him, since he actually helped clear it of brambles last spring. Grandma, for her part, claims she remembers the original agreement, but she also once insisted the mare was a werewolf, so her vote is considered flexible. Primogeniture is the law of the land in many places, meaning the eldest son gets everything. That seems simple until people start debating which son was really eldest, whether the midwife counted the hours properly, or whether one child might have been, fathered by someone passing through on pilgrimage. Sometimes, conveniently, a son disappears for a few years and then reappears when there's land up for grabs. "I was in the Holy Land," he cries. "I was definitely not hiding 3 towns over, working as a cider merchant." Daughters rarely inherit unless there are no sons, and even then, everyone acts like it's a scandal. Marrying off your daughter comes with a dowry, often painfully negotiated, because you're essentially paying someone else to take her off your hands. If she gets land, it becomes her husband's, and any control she had over it vanishes faster than your best pair of socks in the laundry stream. Monks, by the way, are often conveniently disinherited. He chose the cloth, people say. He doesn't need goats, but that doesn't stop Brother Thomas from writing letters from the abbey, politely reminding everyone that he still remembers where the family silver is buried. Historians still debate the flexibility of inheritance practices across regions and classes. Some evidence suggests custom overruled law in many villages. Others point to detailed wills and land charters that show surprising structure. But in your house, it's all side-eyes, mumbled threats, and the quiet knowledge that at least one family member is absolutely waiting for grandma to sneeze the wrong way. Gender, love, and how it rarely aligned. As evening settles in and the hearth flickers low, the topic shifts, naturally, to love. Or more accurately, the idea of it. Because in your medieval world, love and marriage are about as likely to meet as 2 ox carts traveling opposite directions down a 1-lane road, loudly, in the mud. You think about the people you know. Your friend, Mariette, was married off to a cooper twice her age because his roof only leaked on one side and he owned an actual donkey. She now spends her days churning butter and practicing polite silences. Then there's Edgar, who once whispered that he loved the shepherd's daughter but ended up betrothed to his cousin, who never blinks and smells faintly of fish stew. Everyone congratulated him. Love matches do happen. Occasionally, and when they do, they're usually between people too poor to make marriage a business transaction. 2 shepherds, 2 servants, 2 people who fall in love in the barley fields between arguments over whose goat is louder. But even then, the church must approve, families must nod, and dowries, or the lack of them, must be considered. You might write a poem or sneak a flower under someone's door, but mostly, you smile from across the feast table and hope the candlelight is flattering. As for gender roles, they're rigid. Men are expected to labor, lead, fight, and decide. Women are expected to birth, bow, mend, and remain silent, unless asked to recite something pious. That's the official version. In practice, women often run entire households, manage farm tasks, trade in markets, and quietly orchestrate family decisions while the men argue about sheep. Romance, when it does bloom, usually finds expression in coded glances, songs sung at the edge of town, or messages passed through sympathetic cousins. Passion is reserved for courtly love ballads and dramatic plays, not real life. You suppress a smile, remembering when your sister tried to elope with the mason's apprentice. They made it as far as the granary before getting lost. Historians still debate how much affection existed in medieval marriages. Some evidence, letters, wills, poetry, suggests deep emotional bonds. Others argue that companionship, survival, and shared routine built a quieter kind of love. For you, under this creaky roof with your relatives arguing over firewood, the idea of love feels like a luxury. But you still watch the candlelight flicker and wonder, what makes a medieval feast and what doesn't? You wake the next morning to whispers and excitement. Today is a feast day, not the kind with golden goblets and wild boar roasts. No, it's a religious celebration, which in your world means a break from routine, some slightly better food, and if you're lucky, music played on an instrument that isn't broken. You stretch, already dreaming of something other than barley stew. The day begins with church, of course, always church. But once the bells are done tolling and the saints sufficiently praised, the preparations begin. In noble halls, this might mean dozens of servants rushing to prepare pies shaped like castles, or stuffing a peacock back into its own feathers so it looks impressive again. You won't see that. Instead, in your village, it means someone's ox has been sacrificed in honor of St. Hedwig, and the good bits are going in a pot. The rest, distributed generously among the poor, which includes everyone. The food is shared outdoors, if weather allows, laid out on long, wobbly tables and served with spoons, fingers, and the occasional stale crust as a utensil. There's bread, better than usual, maybe with some herbs in it. There's pottage, bulked out with extra onions and a hint of meat. You spot a roasted goose leg. You pray it's not decorative. Now, let's be clear. This is a feast only by medieval standards. No sugar, unless someone raided the monastery. No fruit, unless it's dried and suspiciously chewy. No cutlery unless you brought your own. Everyone shares, and no one asks where the meat came from too loudly. There are pies that seem to contain mostly turnips and something brown. Still, it's warm and salty and not made of moss. A traveling bard starts plucking at a lute with 2 strings. A child dances in a lopsided circle. A dog steals a pie. The crowd cheers. Historians still argue what qualified as a feast among commoners. Some believe even modest gatherings were a form of rebellion against hunger. Others note how feast days served as vital communal glue. Today, as you lick grease from your fingers and try to ignore the smoke wafting from the slightly scorched bread, you don't care. It's a feast, and you're eating. Church-imposed fasting and weird food loopholes. But of course, for every feast, there's a fast. And if you think fasting means nothing but water and prayer, think again. In medieval Europe, the church calendar is packed with days when meat, eggs, and dairy are off limits. Advent, Lent, Ember Days, Rogation Days, Fridays, Saints' Eves. If you're not careful, you'll spend half your life eating like a very pious rabbit. Today, for example, is a Friday. That means no meat. No. But you've cleverly sidestepped the rule with a steaming bowl of eel stew, because, surprise, eels, beavers, puffins, and sometimes even barnacle geese are considered fish, which means they're allowed. Why? Because they live in or near water. It's a theological loophole so large you could ride a donkey cart through it. People get creative. Almond milk substitutes for cow's milk. Dough is fried in oil instead of butter. and your neighbor claims her chicken pie is actually filled with dried pears and spices. No one believes her, but everyone nods politely and eats around the crust. The rules vary depending on how pious your local priest is. Some enforce fasting strictly, demanding penance if you so much as glance at a sausage on the wrong day. Others look the other way, especially if you slip them a slice of fish pie that smells suspiciously porky. For the poor, fasting is often indistinguishable from normal hunger. When you rarely get meat anyway, going without isn't a huge leap. But it's the symbolism that matters. The act of denying yourself is supposed to draw you closer to God, or at least make you more grateful when the goose finally returns to the pot. Historians still debate how widely and faithfully these fasts were followed. Some records suggest exceptions were made for laborers and the ill. Others hint at elaborate circumventions by nobles with theological advisors and impressive kitchens. For you, it means squinting suspiciously at a stew and asking, "Is this fish or holy fish?" before taking a bite. Either way, it tastes salty and chewy and just spiritual enough to count. Table manners and who gets the good bits. You sit on a bench at the feast table, hunched over a wooden plank that serves as your dining surface, and immediately remember that table manners are not optional. They're a sign of your upbringing, your respectability, and possibly whether or not you'll be invited to future meals. You fold your hands. You wait. You pretend not to see the dog sniffing the bread. First rule, don't grab. You're supposed to wait for the platter to be passed, or at least for someone to nod. Of course, by then the good bits are gone, but patience is a virtue. You reach for your portion only to find someone else already licked it. Charming. If you're sharing a trencher, a thick slab of stale bread used as a plate, don't eat off your neighbor's side. And if you must spit out a bone or a gristle blob, do it discreetly, preferably under the bench, not into the communal pot. No elbows on the table, no loud chewing, and if you belch, make sure it sounds appreciative. Seating arrangements matter. Nobles at one end, peasants at the other, and somewhere in between sits the reeve, always pretending he didn't tax your cousin out of his barley harvest. The farther you are from the head of the table, the colder and smaller your portions get. The head gets the roast meat, the soft bread, the honey-glazed, whatever that was. You get the broth and a turnip. And if there's entertainment, music, a story, maybe a dramatic reenactment involving a stuffed pig, don't talk over it. That's rude, unless it's bad. Then you're allowed to boo quietly into your mug. Historians still debate whether table etiquette was universal or mostly observed by the upper classes. In any case, the rules have trickled down enough that you know not to use the knife to scratch your back, even if it's really itchy. You chew, nod, smile, and pray no one notices you stole an extra plum. How you end up eating eels and gruel. By the end of the feast, or what counts for one, you're full, sort of. But the truth is, most days aren't feasts. Most days are gruel. A thick, grayish, lukewarm porridge made of oats, barley, or millet, occasionally flavored with salt if you're lucky, or onions if you're adventurous. It sticks to your bowl and your ribs and your soul. Sometimes there's bread, and if you're especially blessed, a smear of lard or a hunk of aging cheese. But for protein, your best bet is eels. Slippery, chewy, and surprisingly common, they're fished from rivers and ditches, smoked or stewed, and considered both sustenance and penance. You chew slowly, trying not to think about their faces. Eels are great for fasting days, and even better for storage, one of the few meats you can keep around without needing salt or a cellar. You've heard tales of families preserving barrels full of them, like medieval pickles. They stare out with dead eyes, daring you to enjoy them. Some people keep chickens, but eggs are precious. Meat animals are too valuable to eat regularly. So you turn to the humble pottage, vegetables boiled until they become a beige mystery. Carrots, parsnips, possibly bark. Add herbs if you've got a garden or a friendly nun nearby. Meal fatigue is real. After your fifth bowl of barley mush, you fantasize about spice. Cinnamon, ginger, even pepper, luxuries so distant they might as well be legends. Once a traveler let you sniff a clove you've never forgotten. Historians still debate the nutrition of the medieval diet. Some argue that, for the poor, it was surprisingly balanced, low meat, high fiber, lots of root vegetables. Others point to stunted growth, bad teeth, and chronic malnutrition. You just wish you could eat a tomato, except tomatoes won't arrive for another few centuries. So tonight, it's gruel again. And yes, there's an eel. What people thought caused plagues. Just when you think the biggest threat to your health is another bowl of eel gruel, someone sneezes 3 pews over during Mass. Everyone freezes. A child starts crying. An old woman pulls her shawl over her nose. You slowly slide your elbow over your mouth, hoping no one's noticed you were standing a little too close to the fishmonger yesterday. Because in the medieval world, when sickness strikes, suspicion follows right behind it. You've heard all the theories. Some blame bad air, miasma, they call it. The foul stench of rotting food, manure, or swamp mist is said to seep into your lungs and poison you from the inside. That's why people carry posies, dried herbs, or vinegar-soaked cloths in their sleeves. If you can smell something pleasant, they say, you'll be protected from the invisible toxins swirling in the wind. Others blame the stars. A rare alignment of planets, clearly a warning, an eclipse. The heavens groaning with ill intent. You don't know what any of that means, but someone's always pointing to the sky, insisting this all began when Mars wandered too close to Saturn. You try not to look up. Then there are the moral explanations. Sin. That's always a safe bet. A few towns over, a wandering preacher told a crowd that plague was divine punishment for vanity and untrimmed beard hair. He was immediately offered dinner and 2 chickens. You guess it worked. Some say it's the foreigners, or the Jews, or the lepers, or women who look too long at the moon. Someone is always the scapegoat, and panic spreads faster than the disease itself. A sick cow. Burn it. A neighbor with a cough. Avoid her shadow. A priest falls ill. Time for a procession, or maybe burn a few herbs and hang garlic over the church door. Can't hurt. Historians still debate how much people understood about disease transmission. While they lacked knowledge of germs, many medieval communities responded with quarantine, travel restrictions, and surprisingly effective containment methods. But in your world, where fear travels faster than news, the cause of plague is always just a guess away, and none of the guesses feel particularly comforting. Garlic necklaces, charms, and magic symbols. You get home from church, still uneasy after the sneezing incident, and immediately do what any self-respecting medieval person would. You tie a clove of garlic to your belt. Not because you're planning on cooking, heaven forbid, you can't afford that much garlic in the stew, but because you're trying to ward off death. Or demons. Or bad humors. Frankly, you're not entirely sure which. Garlic is considered a powerful tool. Hung over doorways, tied around children's necks, or stuffed into shoes, it's said to repel sickness, spirits, and unwanted attention. You don't love the smell, but you also don't want to be next on the parish sick list, so you lean into the superstition, and garlic is just the beginning. There are amulets for everything. Around your wrist you wear a braided cord with 3 knots, each tied during a specific prayer meant to protect your lungs. Your neighbor carries a tiny pouch of dried herbs and rabbit teeth, which he claims wards off the shakes. Someone else swears by hanging a chicken foot over their doorway. You haven't asked why. You don't want to know. Symbols get scrawled in ash above doorframes, crosses, circles, runes borrowed from long-forgotten alphabets. Even illiterate folks know which ones feel protective. Charms made from wax, metal, or carved bone are passed around, often blessed by a wandering friar who doesn't stay long enough for questions. Is it faith? Is it magic? Honestly, no one's drawing a hard line between the two. You remember your aunt once sewed a small scrap of parchment into your cloak, inked with a Latin phrase meant to repel evil wind. It worked, she said. You haven't died yet, so maybe she's right. Historians still debate how widespread and sincere these practices were. Some suggest charms were more for comfort than belief. Others argue they reflect a deep-rooted tradition of blending folk magic with Christian ritual. But for you, in a world where medicine is mostly guessing and prayer, a garlic clove and a knotted string are sometimes the only things standing between you and the unknown. Flagellants, scapegoats, and social collapse. You wake the next day to drums, not festive drums. These are slow, thunderous, and approaching. You step outside just in time to see them, the flagellants. A procession of barefoot men, stripped to the waist, backs already bleeding from the lashes they carry in their own hands. They march through the village with grim faces, chanting prayers in Latin and striking themselves with rhythmic force. It's not theater, it's penance. You watch in silence as they pass, each swing of the whip a desperate cry to heaven. They believe the plague is punishment, that sin has brought this sickness upon the world. By punishing their own bodies, they hope to save their souls, and maybe yours too. Some kneel in the mud. Some weep openly. One collapses and is carried off by his fellows like a broken offering. You'd pity them more if they weren't also stirring panic. Their arrival coincides with a fresh wave of illness, and soon the whispers begin again. Who's to blame? Someone must be. A stranger in town, a midwife who knows too much about herbs, a boy who coughed at the wrong moment. Fear is a faster contagion than the plague. It gets darker. People begin to turn on each other. Someone accuses a neighbor of poisoning a well. Another blames a group of beggars for drawing down misfortune. The local reeve threatens to throw out anyone who won't stay home on fast days. Churches are full. So are the graveyards. Commerce halts. The mill doesn't run. Bread prices climb. You hear about a nearby village that locked its gates and posted guards. They turned away everyone, even relatives, just to keep the sickness out. Desperate, sure, but you can't say they were wrong. Historians still debate how organized the flagellant movements truly were. Some were sanctioned briefly by the church. Others were condemned for spreading fear and superstition. But there's no doubt they left a mark. On the roads, on their backs, and in the collective panic of the times. As the drums fade into the distance, you wrap your garlic charm tighter and quietly wonder if anyone will be left to tell the tale. Historians still debate plague responses today. As the weeks drag on, life around you starts to change in subtle, uneasy ways. The market is quieter, fewer people linger at the well. The church bells ring more often, but not always for Mass. Sometimes they toll low and slow for someone lost, and with each ring, another neighbor disappears behind a shuttered door. People respond in all the ways people always do, some with kindness, some with fear, some with frantic energy that seems to say, if I stay busy enough, it won't find me. A priest walks from house to house, holding up a cross and murmuring blessings through closed windows. A few brave souls deliver bread and onions to the ill, leaving the food on doorsteps and backing away quickly, crossing themselves twice. Other responses are less noble. A merchant raises prices on vinegar and charms. A group of villagers chases off a wandering beggar just because he coughed. One family flees to the woods, planning to live off berries and hope. No one hears from them again. You find yourself participating in strange little rituals, washing your hands more often, whispering an extra prayer at sunrise, leaving a sprig of rosemary on the doorstep, just in case. It's not that you believe each thing will save you, it's that doing something feels better than doing nothing. Historians still debate how organized these responses were. In some towns there were laws, quarantine zones, red markings on infected homes, even guards posted at roads. In others, it was chaos, fear and faith vying for dominance. Some chronicles speak of heroism, with monks and healers tending to the sick selflessly. Others record the opposite: looting, riots, and people too afraid to bury the dead. And then, strangely, life keeps going. The chickens still need feeding. The turnips still grow. The gossip still flows. There's something eerily normal about the way people carry on, even when the world feels like it's cracking at the edges. You watch the sky that evening and wonder, will the stars shift again? Will this pass like a storm? Or will you wake tomorrow to find your name spoken softly in prayer by someone lighting a candle in the dark? Candlelit danger and fear of fire. Night falls slowly over the village, stretching shadows long across cobbled lanes and thatched rooftops. Inside your home, the dim gray of twilight gives way to near total blackness. There's no flick of a switch, no gentle hum of electricity, just the soft crackle of the hearth and the faint flicker of a tallow candle, its flame swaying like it's trying to decide whether to stay lit or run away, screaming. You move carefully. Everyone does. Fire is a friend and a menace, your only source of light and warmth, and your most likely cause of disaster. Candles are made from tallow, which is just a poetic word for animal fat. They stink when they burn. They drip. They don't last long, and if you forget one near the rush-strewn floor, you could bring down the whole house, or worse, the whole village. Every home keeps a bucket of water or sand near the hearth, not because it will actually stop anything, but because it makes people feel like they're prepared. Some families post a watch at night, a rotating schedule where someone stays awake for an hour or two, just to be sure nothing catches alight. You once slept through your turn. You haven't been allowed to forget it. Lamps exist, of course, but oil is expensive and often saved for the very ill, the very wealthy, or the very holy. Most homes make do with the hearth and a single flame. If you need to visit someone after dark, you carry a lantern and walk like a man balancing soup on his head. And then there's the fear, always there in the back of your mind, that a single spark might find dry straw. A gust through the shutter, a tipped candle, a cat brushing too close to the coals. You've heard stories. Everyone has. Whole towns reduced to ashes overnight. Families losing everything but the clothes on their back, and even then, not always. Historians still debate how frequently medieval fires occurred, but records show entire neighborhoods burned with alarming regularity. For you, each night ends with a quiet ritual, checking the hearth, trimming the wick, whispering a prayer to St. Florian, and hoping the flame flickers only in its proper place. Why no one really sleeps through the night? It's well past dark now, but sleep doesn't come all at once, and certainly not in one neat, uninterrupted stretch. Medieval sleep is different. Most people drift off early, not long after nightfall, bundled in wool, pressed shoulder to shoulder on straw mats or wooden benches. You lie down in your shift, maybe under a shared blanket if your family's modestly well off, or just your cloak if it's been a lean winter. But here's the thing. No one expects to sleep straight through. In fact, most people experience what's known as first sleep, a few hours of deep, early slumber, followed by a period of quiet wakefulness. and then a second sleep that carries you through to dawn. During that in-between time, you might stoke the fire, say a few prayers, visit the chamber pot, or just lie in the dark, listening to the house breathe. Some even use this midnight interval for more social activities, conversations. Confessions. Occasionally a whispered tryst if the children are snoring and the dog's not watching. It's a kind of pause in the night, a moment of half-rest and reflection. For you, the first sleep comes quickly. Exhaustion will do that. But you're awake again before midnight, blinking at the ceiling and swatting at something with too many legs. The house creaks. Outside, a donkey brays and someone mutters in their sleep. You roll over, adjust your cloak, and try not to think about the sound the chimney just made. Sleep is fragile. The straw mat pokes you. Someone's elbow finds your ribs. The dog's tail is in your face. Still, this is normal. Expected. You've never known another way. There are no glowing screens, no late-night snacks, no lamps to read by. Just the fire, the darkness, and the occasional whispered comment about how cold someone's feet are. Historians have traced this segmented sleep pattern across many regions, noting how common and natural it once was. Only with modern lighting and schedules did we begin to expect 8 continuous hours. Back now, in your medieval bed with your knees curled up for warmth and a dream just beyond reach, the pause between sleeps feels less like an interruption and more like a strangely peaceful intermission. Night noises, dreams, and creeping dread. You lie there, staring into the dark, somewhere between first sleep and second. The hearth has dimmed to glowing coals, casting long, eerie shadows up the stone wall. Your breath is slow, but your ears are busy, because at night, the world doesn't stop. It just whispers. There's the scuttling of something small in the thatch roof. A rat, probably, or a weasel, if you're lucky. It rustles, then stills. Then starts again. Somewhere outside, a dog barks once. Then silence. Then again. Then something that sounds like a cart creaking, even though no one's foolish enough to travel after dark. Night in a medieval village is never truly quiet. Animals stir. Winds whistle through loose shutters. Wood contracts with groans. People snore, shift, mutter, and in some cases, speak full sentences in their sleep. The priest's apprentice, who lives down the lane, once recited the entire opening of the Gospel of Luke while dreaming, in Latin. Backward. You haven't slept right since. Then come the dreams. No one takes dreams lightly. They're believed to carry omens, warnings, or messages from saints and sinners alike. If you dream of water, someone might drown. If you dream of fire, there could be a birth or a death. Snakes are bad, birds are worse. If your own teeth fall out in a dream, prepare yourself for sorrow. That's what the village herbalist says anyway, and she's only been wrong twice. You dream often. Sometimes it's flying over hills you've never seen. Sometimes it's losing a shoe before a feast and realizing too late you've come barefoot to church. Sometimes you see someone who died 3 winters ago standing at the foot of your bed. You wake with a start, clutching the blanket that isn't really yours, and try to remember if you said your prayers before sleeping. Historians note how seriously dreams were taken in medieval life. They weren't mere nonsense. They were part of the unseen world, a nighttime message board for divine hints and shadowy threats. You roll onto your side, hoping for something gentler this time, maybe a dream of geese or sheep. Or just uninterrupted rest, but you already hear the rat again, and someone's breathing very heavily right beside your head. Midnight worries, whispered prayers, and watching the fire. You're still awake. Not fully, not really, but not asleep either. just lying there, blinking slowly, letting your mind wander through every anxious corridor it can find. You think about the roof and whether it will hold if the rain comes early, about the flour sack, how low it's gotten, about the neighbor's goat, which has been acting strange, about death, always somewhere at the back of your thoughts, padding softly like a stray dog. So you whisper a prayer. Not loudly, just a breath of words, half remembered and half made up, weaving together saints' names and a list of quiet, pleading requests. Let the roof hold. Let the barley last. Let tomorrow be easier. You say them into the darkness like someone passing notes under a locked door, hoping the right pair of ears is listening. You glance toward the hearth. The fire has shrunk to nothing but red-orange coals now, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. It's not quite warm, but it's something. You watch it like one watches the last candle at a wake, hoping it will hold just long enough. Long enough for the second sleep to come. Long enough to keep the shadows on the other side of the room. Someone nearby is muttering. Possibly dreaming, possibly praying, like you, a child coughs. A spoon shifts in a bowl. No one put away. You resist the urge to sit up and check the latch on the door. It's probably fine. Probably. Your hand brushes against the edge of the blanket. It's rough, but it's real. You ground yourself there. In the texture of wool, the soft crunch of straw beneath your mat, the rhythmic rise and fall of breath, your own, and those lying beside you. Family. Neighbors, all wrapped in the same fragile quiet. Historians often write about nighttime in the medieval world as a time of reflection, superstition, and vulnerability. But there's something else too. Resilience. People got up again the next morning, every day. You will too. But for now, you let your eyes close. The fire pulses. The house murmurs. And somewhere deep inside the dark, second sleep finally returns. Waking sore, cold, and already behind second sleep, ends not with a gentle dawn, but with a stiff shoulder, a sneeze, and someone stepping on your foot. Morning in medieval life doesn't arrive so much as barge in, coughing and muttering, with cold hands and damp air. You open your eyes to grey light sneaking through the wooden shutters and the comforting aroma of, yes, smoke, damp wool, and stale onion. You're sore, as always. Your back feels like you've spent the night under a cartwheel. Your neck protests as you sit up. The straw under you is matted into weird ridges, and you have at least one new bite. Flea, probably, though there's always hope it was just a very aggressive piece of straw. Your blanket has migrated to someone else, and your tunic, folded neatly at bedtime, is now being used by the dog as a pillow. There's already movement. Your father is stoking the hearth, muttering at the embers like they owe him money. Your siblings argue in hushed tones about who gets to pee first. Someone's coughing. Someone else is singing. The baby's awake. The goat is bleating again. It's barely light out, and already you feel behind. There's no such thing as sleeping in. The world doesn't wait. The cows won't milk themselves. The woodpile won't refill itself. And if you're not careful, the good water from the well will be gone by the time you drag your bucket out there. You pull on your linen shift, then your tunic, then whatever passes for socks this week. Left and right don't really matter when both have holes. You splash your face with cold water, because it's all there is, and blink hard against the sting. You chew a piece of leftover bread that's harder than your bed, then tuck the rest into your satchel for later. It'll still be there by lunch, still hard, still dry, and still the only thing between you and hunger. Historians often note how structured the medieval day was, beginning with prayer, chores, and a simple meal. But they rarely mention the quiet exhaustion of waking up already tired. You sigh, stretch your arms, and brace yourself for another full day of mud, muscle, and mildly suspicious cheese. The daily gamble of weather and work. You step outside and are immediately greeted by the weather, your old frenemy. Today it's cold, gray, and damp, with a chill that climbs straight up your spine and settles somewhere between your shoulder blades. Not cold enough for snow, not wet enough for a full storm, but just uncomfortable enough to make everything feel heavier. Your tunic sticks to your arms, your breath fogs in the air, and the ground. Mud. Always mud. Weather is not just background scenery. It's the deciding force of your life. Rain means bad roads. Dry spells mean failed crops. Wind means lost laundry or a knocked-over cooking pot. A freak storm could flood your field, blow the thatch off your roof, or worse, knock over your neighbor's beehive, and nobody wants that. Today's job? Gathering firewood. You make your way toward the edge of the forest with a dull axe and a woven basket that's fraying along one side. You scan the trees for fallen branches or dead wood you can haul back. Cutting live trees is discouraged, sometimes even punished, unless you've got the Lord's permission. You don't. As you work, you think about how much of your life depends on things you can't control. One bad frost and your garden's ruined. One dry month and your well starts coughing up dust. One strong wind and your best chicken is airborne, your back aches, your fingers sting, and you're only halfway done. Other villagers pass by on similar missions, some carrying bundles of reeds for thatch repairs, others with empty baskets bound for mushroom patches or hazelnut groves. Everyone nods to each other, but doesn't stop to chat. There's too much to do and not enough daylight to do it. Historians often focus on the agricultural rhythms of the medieval year, ploughing in spring, harvesting in autumn, but they sometimes skip over the daily dance of labor and weather. You live by the clouds. You pray for rain, but not too much. You pray for sun, but not so much that it bakes your field to a crisp. It's a constant wager against the sky, and the house always wins. Still, you find a few dry branches and wedge them under your arm, feeling oddly victorious. You know it won't be enough. It never is. But for now, the wind hasn't picked up, the wood is dry, and your boots haven't fallen apart. Yet. That strange ache you call normal. By midday, the kind of tired you feel doesn't come from one morning's work. It's the tired that's been collecting for years. Your knees creak when you stand, your lower back protests like it's owed money, your feet ache in that deep bone-heavy way that tells you the soles of your shoes, and possibly your body, have given up hope. You stretch your arms overhead and feel exactly 5 different cracks. This is normal. Everyone you know moves like this. The old people hobble and mutter about weather in the bones, while the young ones, like you, already wince when bending down to tie a boot or haul a bucket. Pain is part of the landscape. If something doesn't hurt, you probably haven't used it today. Your fingers are rough with calluses and cracked from cold. Your shoulder twinges from carrying water. Your thighs burn from kneeling in the fields, and you're not even going to think about what's going on with your neck. You sleep on straw, carry stones, and walk 10 miles just to discover the chicken escaped again. There's no word for chronic pain in your world, only bad luck and stiffness. You might try a bit of herbal salve, if someone has some, or a poultice that smells like feet and feels like cold porridge. Maybe the local healer will offer you some boiled willow bark. You thank them, drink it, and pretend it helps. Occasionally, someone will tell you, "You're too young to be in pain." You smile politely and continue limping. Everyone's too young to hurt this much, and too old to stop. Historians write about medieval health as if it's a binary, sick or well, fit or failing. But in your life, there's a vast middle ground. You're not dying. You're not broken. You just hurt, all the time. In little, annoying ways that add up until the idea of feeling truly well seems like something reserved for saints and cats. Still, you get up. You keep going. Because aches don't stop the chickens from wandering, the thatch from leaking, or the soup from boiling over. You adjust your satchel, stretch your back, and hobble toward the next task, just like everyone else. Evening routines, shared warmth, and slow quiet. As the sun dips low, casting gold across rooftops and turning the muddy path outside to soft shadow, you trudge home. The air smells of hearth smoke, wet earth, and whatever's in your neighbor's pot, which, based on the smell, is probably cabbage and resignation. You drop your bundle of firewood near the door, stretch your aching shoulders, and step inside. Evening routines unfold in quiet, practiced movements. Someone feeds the animals, someone stokes the fire, someone, maybe you, shakes out the flea-ridden blanket and tries to find the side that doesn't smell like yesterday's soup. The room glows gently now, not bright but warm, and not just from the fire, from the company. From the relief of having made it through another day. The meal is simple: broth, some grain, a scrap of onion, and maybe a sliver of meat if someone bartered well at the market. It's ladled out into shared bowls, eaten with wooden spoons and quiet chewing. You talk a little about the chicken that laid its egg in the chimney, about the storm you hear might roll in tomorrow, about the saints' feast coming up and whether there'll be music this time. There's no rush. Time stretches in the evening, even when your stomach is still half hollow. The candles flicker, the fire pops softly, and outside the sky folds into itself. Children are tucked into piles of straw. The elderly ease into their corner spots by the hearth, where they'll nod off mid-story. You sit back, legs crossed, running your fingers over a loose thread in your sleeve, letting your thoughts wander. Someone sings a low song, maybe an old hymn, maybe a silly one about a rooster who wouldn't shut up. You say your prayers, touching the rough wood of your crucifix, or maybe just whispering them into your hands. There's no certainty that tomorrow will be kinder. But you've made it tonight. That, in your world, is no small victory. And now, let everything soften. The fire burns low, casting slow shadows against the wall. You settle back onto your straw mat, the day's weight pressing evenly into the ground beneath you. The scratch of wool on your skin no longer matters. The smell of smoke is familiar, like the closing of a well-read book. Someone sighs nearby. A spoon clinks in an empty bowl. The last candle is pinched out. It's quiet now. The air is cool, still. Outside, the wind moves gently through the eaves, like someone breathing in their sleep. The night is long, but you no longer dread it. You've come to know its rhythms, the stillness, the waking, the dreaming, the returning. You lie curled beneath your blanket, listening to the sound of firewood settling, of slow breaths rising and falling, of time itself softening its pace. All around you, others sleep. Not deeply, not yet, but peacefully. Worn bodies, tired hands, quiet hearts. It's not comfort you seek anymore. It's rest, and that, here in this moment, is enough. You let your thoughts drift gently, toward that chicken in the chimney, toward the taste of warm broth, toward the softness of second sleep. Nothing urgent follows you here. No tasks. No fears. Only the hush of night and the quiet promise that tomorrow will come, just like it always has. So close your eyes. Let the ache fade. Let the hush settle over you like a blanket. Sleep now. You've earned it. Sweet dreams.